And this, the story of Entebbe, is the story of our generation, of the modern day Maccabees. I want to start our story on Sunday morning, June 27th, 1976. A young couple, both of them children of survivors. It's the first time they're going to live the dream that their grandparents and great-grandparents could only dream of, and that is go to the Holy Land, go to Israel. And what happened? George and Renee Carfunkel left their infant daughter with their parents, who would babysit the daughter, and they were going to have a chance for the first time in their life to experience Israel. And they had a wonderful trip. On the way home, they're going to go to the famous European city, to Paris, on their way back to New York. And Sunday morning, they get to the airport. At Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, first you give your luggage. It has to go through inspection. The luggage passes, they've checked it, sent it through. And the Air France desk, he looks up, and unlike what had been written on their itinerary, unlike what they had scheduled with their travel agent, where there was going to be a direct flight, Air France Flight 139 was going to go Sunday morning to Paris, and they would spend a couple of days in Paris and go home on Tuesday. What happened? There's going to be a stopover. Air France Flight 139 is going to stop in Athens, and then from Athens go to Paris. George looks at Renee and he says, we're not going to Athens. Athens? It's the worst security of any airport in Europe. Athens is where the PFLP commandeered one of the flights that was blown up in Jordan in 1970. The woman behind the counter says, look, mister, you don't want to go on this flight. You want a direct flight to Paris? It's going to wait till, you have to wait till Monday night. And I'll tell you this, your cargo, your luggage is already in the cargo hold. We can't take that out once it's been sent through. Your luggage is going to Paris. They look at each other. What are they going to do? What choice do they have? They go on the flight. Air France Flight 139 takes off from Tel Aviv to Athens. Nice, smooth, quick flight. They land. 58 new passengers get on Air France Flight 139. We're interested in 4 of them. 2 of these passengers, Brigitte Kuhlmann and Wilfried Bös. They're members of the infamous Baader-Meinhof gang. The Baader-Meinhof gang that has the affection of the progressive liberal community in Germany. They're anti-capitalist, they're anti-establishment. They've partnered with international terror organizations across the world, the Jackal, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They're bad news. So these 2 get on the plane. Who else gets on the plane? 2 Palestinians, members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They get on in Bahrain. In Bahrain, there's no security. They literally get on the plane. They have grenades in their hand luggage. They have guns on them. And in Bahrain, they were able to get on, fly to Athens. When they get to Athens, the 2 Palestinians, there's no inter-airport security. They go from the gate where they landed from Bahrain to the Air France Flight 139 gate. And there, after boarding the plane, they share their weaponry with their 2 comrades, the 2 West Germans. As the plane takes off from Athens on its way to Paris, what happens? After it hits altitude, flying altitude, they rush the cockpit. They rush the cockpit and commandeer the plane. The plane goes on radio silence, which is a bad sign. That's one of 2 things. That means either the plane has crashed or it's been commandeered by terrorists. The first time George in his life sees a gun is when Brigitte Kuhlmann, who was the most vicious of the terrorists, she takes her gun, slams it in his chest, and says, "Get out of the seat!" They moved all the men out of the aisle rows, put them against windows in the middle rows, and they had women sitting in the aisles. Their logic was they thought that the women wouldn't try to jump them as they walked through and manned the aisles. The flight, after what seems to be an inordinate amount of time, it lands. They don't know where they are. It turned out the flight landed in Benghazi, Libya. Who is the leader of Libya in 1976? Muammar Gaddafi. And Gaddafi, who is a a fan, a comrade of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They refuel the plane in Benghazi. They bring in supplies, goods. And after a while, the flight takes off. And again, the minutes turn into hours, and it seems like forever. It's dark at this point. They don't know where they are. The flight lands after hours, and they have no clue where they are. All they see is black soldiers. That's all they see. They don't know where or what this is. Before they're allowed to get off the plane, everyone must give their passports, their identification cards, everyone. When they get off the plane, they find out. They're in Kampala, Uganda. Kampala is the capital of Uganda. They are in what's turned out to be the old terminal of the Entebbe airport of Kampala, Uganda. Who were these soldiers? The Ugandan army. 3 more Palestinians join the 4 of them, and they have what will turn out to be 100 Ugandan soldiers as well. A selection is made. We're 30 years since Auschwitz, and it's the very Germans, Wilfried Burrs and Brigitte Kuhlmann, that make a selection. 150 some passengers are put into one part of the terminal. 89 passengers who have Israeli passports are selected out, together with 4 others, George and Renee and 2 young men who are conspicuously looking Jews, not because they have Israeli passports, but there's a yarmulke on their head. It is now already Monday a.m. The world finds out what has happened to Air France Flight 139. This joint mission of the PFLP and Baader Meinhof wants $5 million cash American and 53 of their comrades in arms. The deadline is noon, Thursday, July 1st. In the event that the 53 comrades in arms are not emancipated, we will start shooting the hostages. And what happens? The world is focused on Israel. 2 pieces of background. In Israel, there are 3 names we have to know. The Prime Minister, the first time that he served as Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin. The Defense Minister, Shimon Peres. And number 3, Mata Gur. General Mata Gur of 6-Day War fame. He is the head of the IDF. Why Uganda? How in the world did the PFLP choose Uganda? Idi Amin Dada, one of the 20th century's worst, most heinous butchers. This man murdered 300,000 black Ugandans, 300,000 of his countrymen. This is a sick, heinous individual. Uganda, like many black African countries, was supported already from the 1950s by Israel. What happened? In 1972, with the OPEC oil Arab embargo, the black African nations, many of them, had the choice. We'll provide oil if you throw the Zionists out. Idi Amin was not only provided Arab oil, but was provided Russian MiGs to have an air force and Russian weaponry through the Arabs. He threw Israel out. Israel, in its young history from 1948 through 1976, had never, ever negotiated with terrorists. The policy is we don't negotiate with terrorists. We had nothing, no plan that's going to work. What are we going to do? The Labor Cabinet, which is meeting around the clock, and they call in the opposition leader, Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin, who is the leader of the Cherut Party, which is today the Likud Party. They call him in, and they decide for the first time in Israel's history, they're going to negotiate with terrorists. There is no credible military plan, and they decide to negotiate. Rabin turns to Begin. He said, look, we don't have another option. The world will hold us responsible for the lives of 260 people. Menachem Begin said the following: irrespective of whether I agree or disagree with you, Not today and not in 10 years from now will you see me or any of our party backstabbing you. And we're backing you. This is not a time for partisan politics. And they announced that they would negotiate. The next day, Wednesday, June 31st, the cover of the New York Post. And anyone who knows the New York Post, only they can do this. And big, black, bold letters. Israel surrenders. Israel surrenders. The last holdout, the last bastion that would not negotiate with terrorists is now capitulated. As a function of this, Idi Amin and the terrorists do the following. They tell Air France, fly in another plane. All of the other passengers were sent on that plane to Paris. The 93 Jews, and one of the heroes of this story, he's still alive, he's 92 years old today. He was the pilot of the Air France flight. He said, the captain stays with the ship. The captain goes down with his ship and does not abandon its passengers. Not that all the crew agreed with that, but he insisted that the crew, all 12 of them, stay with until every last hostage is released. So there's now 105. 89 Israelis, 4 conspicuous-looking Jews, 12 members of the Air France flight. When that flight of hostages lands on Wednesday, June 31st in Paris, in de Gaulle, waiting for them long before they meet their families, along with French intelligence, is who? The Mossad. The Mossad does a series of interviews with almost all of the passengers, almost all the hostages, and they come to two conclusions. Two conclusions. One's very good, one is terrible. Conclusion number one. All along, the terrorists have been saying, don't play games with us, don't get smart with us, this place is booby-trapped, and the whole building will be blown up, hostages, terrorists will all go down. That's a lie. It's very clear to them, with almost 95% certainty, the place is not booby-trapped. It's not wired. That's the good news. The bad news? Idi Amin, for the last 4 days, has been saying, they showed up, what can I do? If my soldiers come in and try to commandeer and take over, they'll blow up the place. Idi Amin's a liar. He's been in cahoots with them. Our worst fears, contrary to everything he said, our worst fears have now been confirmed. This is not just an anti-terror mission. It's not just 4 terrorists, it's 7 terrorists. And they're housed in the VIP room of the first floor of the Entebbe airport, of the Entebbe terminal. On the second floor are quartered tens and tens of Ugandan soldiers. Now we're dealing with a military mission. That's what they find out. And here's the miracle of our modern day Maccabees, of our modern day Hanukkah story. Years before, when Israel was helping Uganda, an Israeli construction firm was offered the opportunity to bid on this terminal. Now, contrary to the stories that we've heard, that it was Solel Boneh who built it actually wasn't. The Israeli firm did not get the contract. The terminal, the old terminal, at that time it was the new terminal, now it's the old terminal, Entebbe, it was built by an Italian firm. But you know what a pat rack is, these people who save everything? The Israeli construction firm saved every architectural blueprint that they had ever, not just built, but they'd ever bid on for a construction project. He had come to the IDF. The IDF now has literally the architectural blueprint, where the entrances are, where the stairwells are. And based upon the Mossad interrogations and questioning of the hostages on Wednesday, it was clear that no significant structural changes had been made to the building. They know where the hostages are being held. They can create a Hollywood set, and they can do a practice run. Now they have a chance of a military mission. What else did they find from the hostages? Every time Idi Amin had come, he had come in a black stretch Mercedes limousine with a Ugandan flag, followed by 2 Range Rovers. The surprise will be, they'll think it's Idi Amin coming. That's how we'll do the element of surprise. One little problem. In the whole state of Israel, there was not one black stretch Mercedes limousine. There was an Arab, a Muslim living in the east part of Jerusalem, who had an old white stretch Mercedes limousine. They're going to tell him, we're planning a raid on the hostages. They came up with some story. They came to him, they said, we got a film crew. We're paying the actors, we're paying the cameramen, or the directors, we got this whole, it's costing us a fortune. We need a stretch Mercedes limousine. We'll give you whatever you'd like for it. Can we have it for about a week? We want to do it and we'll make it worth your while financially. He started laughing at them. He says, you can take this piece of junk. He said, go, you have it. They didn't know what he meant by that. So they find out. It was a piece of junk. They got a paint crew and they painted it black. Israel has just sent a young squadron of Air Force pilots led by a man by the name of Yehoshua, known as Shuki Shami. And they spent a good couple months where? In Georgia. What were they doing in Georgia? For the first time, Israel procured these, you say in Yiddish, Amamezetzer, these monster cargo planes, known as the Hercules C-130. What's a Hercules C-130? It can transport tanks, it can transport troops, it can transport trucks, Humvees. Great! We have a mission to do. It's going to be somewhat of a military mission. We've got a whole transport mechanism we can use. And at this time, remember, this is before the Begin-Sadat Accords. This is 1976. The southernmost point of Israel is not Eilat, like today. What's the southernmost point of Israel? Sharm el-Sheikh. So from Sharm el-Sheikh, we'll travel to Uganda, to Kampala, to the Entebbe airport, and we'll take the C-130 Hercules, transport everything, medical units, equipment. So General Matagur, he looks at them. He says, you want to take my best soldiers, the brightest, the best, the elite future of Israel. You're going to take them to Uganda. And let's say by some miracle we're successful at releasing the hostages. How exactly do you think you're going to get these planes back? You have to get there by flying under radar. You're going over enemy territory. Flying under radar, the gas that you use, the fuel that you consume? How exactly are you going to get back, huh? So the man who's heading this plan, this whole surprise mission where we use the Sayeret Matkal and then we'll bring in the paratroopers, the top unit of the army, Ehud Barak, we got to pull him off the mission. We're now on Thursday, July 1st. You know why? Because of all the black African countries that when we're offered the OPEC by the Arabs, the oil in 72, they all broke off relations and turned their back on Israel. One didn't. Kenya. The only way we can prepare anything is if we can go from Kampala to Nairobi, which is nothing, it's a flight of literally minutes, take off our wounded, have Israeli medvacs there, and reload, refuel the planes in Kenya. They called Kenya. They said, what you're asking us to do is going to be war on Idi Amin. Idi Amin has tried revolt. He's killed hundreds of Kenyans. He's tried to create revolt. He's a bitter enemy, and he's on their next door. He's literally next door to them. We need to get back to you. They called back hours later. They said, we cannot share this with the Prime Minister because he'll say no. But you've been very good to us. You've trained our soldiers. You've looked after us. We're going to say yes with two conditions. One, you never spoke to us. You never called us in advance. You showed up. You said that it was an El Al flight coming from South Africa, that had mechanical problems, and then you showed up. What were we supposed to do? The Israelis said, yeah, we live by that condition. Condition number two, Idi Amin, no matter what story we tell, is going to come after us and come after us hard. The only way we allow you to do this, Idi Amin has 11 Russian MiGs. He's got an Air Force. That Air Force, with those MiGs, within 90 seconds can be from Kampala, from Entebbe Airport into Nairobi, could blow up our capital city. You're going to take out the MiGs. Because if you take out his MiGs, he can't do serious damage to us. You're Israel. What choice do you have? What are you going to say? So one of the people that was charged with that was a man who would eventually, at that time no one knew his name, he was an Iranian, a Persian Jewish immigrant. He would eventually become the head of the whole IDF, the head of the whole Israeli army, a man by the name of Shaul Mofaz, who goes on to become a minister in the cabinet. Okay, we could get there, we could get back, we have the element of surprise, maybe, just maybe, we got a chance, because the negotiations are not doing very well. Why? The negotiations, Israel's willing to allow of the 40 Palestinians in their prisons, those who have not killed or murdered innocent Jews, they'll trade. And the terrorists have said back to them, you don't dictate the terms, we dictate the terms here. There are terms, not yours. So the negotiations are not going very well. Idi Amin pushed off the deadline from noon on July 1st to 8 a.m. Sunday, July 4th. Why 8 a.m. Sunday, July 4th, 1976? Two reasons. Idi Amin served as the president of the Union of African Nations. That's a 2-year term. That weekend, Idi Amin is going to be, from Thursday until Saturday evening, is going to be in Mauritius. Why Mauritius? Because Mauritius will now serve for the next 2 years as the president of the Union of African Nations. He's passing the baton. Nothing is going to happen when Idi Amin's not there. When he's not in front of it, doesn't call the shots. So he pushes it off. So why till Sunday? Because what's happening Sunday, July 4th? The whole world, for months, has been preparing for this great event. It's the bicentennial. The bicentennial of the United States of America. The heads of France, of Germany, of every major country on the face of the earth are going to be in America on Sunday, July 4th to celebrate with America the bicentennial. And who's going to take the news and who's going to take the camera and the limelight away from Gerald R. Ford in the United States of America? Idi Amin. Matagur says, we have the beginnings of a plan. But let me ask you there, young men, Shuki Shami and the other young men, you think you can fly these things under radar? We'll refuel in Kenya, you could fly back. Let me just ask you one little fact that you think about. Do you think when you show up in Entebbe, that Entebbe there's going to be a big sign that says, Shalom Aleichem, welcome to the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, and they're going to be playing Hava Nagila? Have you guys, with your time in Georgia, learned how to fly these things in the dark? Because don't expect to have the lights on when you come. So there was silence in the room. He does the following. He said, guys, you know what? Think about radar. Radar bounces off of sand in terms of the way we see it on the screen, different than radar bounces off of water, different than radar bounces off of something which is tangible and concrete, like asphalt or cement. So the way we could land these things is based upon what the radar looks like. Because we know by Entebbe Airport, there's the landing strip, and then there's sand on either side of the landing strip. Let's try landing it that way. So General Matagur says, boys, I'll believe this when I see it. And in fact, this is Thursday, July 1st. We're going to go to Sharm el-Sheikh. You have sand on either side. You got water around, just like you have Lake Victoria. In the dark, comes around, turns on the lights about 35, 40 meters before the ground. Sure enough, he did it right. This is the first time all week since the hijacking on Sunday. Thursday night, Matagur gives the go-ahead. That is going to influence the cabinet. He supports military action for the first time. Well, the head of this plan is now being sent off to Kenya to work with the Kenyans, Ehud Barak. Who's going to replace him? A man who's a good friend of his. Person who's about to actually finish his tour of duty in the IDF. He's living with a girlfriend by the name of Buria. When he finishes his tour of duty, they're going to announce they're going to be engaged and married that year. This man, his name, this 29-year-old, is not known to anyone in the world. It's a classified name. But his father is a famous academician. His father, Ben-Sion Netanyahu, is the world's preeminent historian on the story of the Inquisition of Spanish Jewry. When Professor Netanyahu was a visiting professor at Harvard, his son, his oldest son, this young man, Yonatan, got a degree there. He finished his first tour of duty in the army, and he applied, was accepted, got a degree, an undergraduate degree in philosophy. Other times when Professor Netanyahu had been a visiting professor in America, his second son, his middle son, Bibi or Benjamin, applied, got a degree in engineering at MIT. So Yoni is called up from the Negev, presented the plans, and now he is going to run this mission. They prepare all day Friday. And on Friday night, they do a practice run. The practice run is an abysmal, terrible debacle. It's a failure! If there's 25 or more soldiers or hostages that die, it will have been a failure. And it will be the end of the Rabin Perez government. They send the members of Sayeret Matkal, the elite anti-terror forces, they send them to bed Friday night. And Yoni Netanyahu and the squad commanders, they sit almost all night, and they tweak it. They are confident, they are optimistic that they can do certain things that didn't go well the night before. On Friday, one of the hostages, a 73-year-old woman by the name of Dora Bloch, who was traveling with her son, Ilan Hartuv, through Paris to London to attend the wedding of her other son. She chokes on Friday, July 2nd, on a piece of meat. The Ugandans who are there servicing them, we can't get this out. We got to get her to the hospital, even though she's barely breathing, but we can't leave her path blocked. They take her immediately to the hospital. In the hospital, they're able to dislodge the piece of meat. She's okay. On Saturday, July 3rd, she should be released from the hospital and sent back to the airport to join the other hostages. The Ugandan health minister doctors her papers. He hates Idi Amin. He's scared to death of Idi Amin, but he says, I'm not sending her back to get her killed tomorrow. Let's keep her in the hospital and let's protect her. And that was his goal. And he kept her in the hospital. It's now Shabbos, Saturday, July 3rd. The only way this mission takes place is if they leave central Israel, when? By 11:30. Because they have to get to Sharm el-Sheikh, they have to get the C-130 Hercules refueled, loaded up, and they have to take off no later than 3:30 from Sharm el-Sheikh. Why? Because they're flying under radar. They're not going to go on a direct route. They're not flying over Egypt or Libya where they could be shot down. They're going to take the Yam Suf, the Red Sea, and then they're going to go through Eritrea because they think Eritrea, of all the countries that don't have relations with Israel, probably has the weakest anti-planes, surface-to-air missiles. They're going to take a circuitous route that they think is a safer route because they're literally dead ducks. They're flying 100 meters over the ground under radar. Intelligence has it. The last commercial air flight that's going to land on Saturday night, July 3rd, is actually landing around midnight, between 12 and 12:10 a.m. It's a British Airways flight that's supposed to land in Entebbe. They're going to come in on the tail of that British air flight within a few minutes. Hopefully the lights will be on. They won't have to try to land it in the dark. But that can only happen if they leave Sharm el-Sheikh by when? By 3:30 Shabbos or Saturday afternoon, July 3rd. The four planes took different routes. They didn't fly together because there are Russian ships in the Mediterranean. They don't want to even let the Russians are always trying to do intelligence on Israel. They don't want them to get the sense that there's like a whole squadron, that there's a mission. So the four planes took all different routes. They were flying under radar through Israel. And there was such friction and turbulence. One of the guys, they even tried giving him IV fluid. He couldn't. They had to take him off. They took a guy from the fourth plane, put him on the first plane. He's going to be in Yoni with the car. They're going to have to train him on the way to Uganda, what his role is and what his job is going to be. They take off 3:30. The security cabinet has not approved this mission. On radio silence is going to have to be a code word, one word. You know when the security cabinet finally approves this thing? 5:30 p.m. 2 hours after they've taken off from Sharm el-Sheikh, they get the code word that it's a go. Yitzhak Rabin asked Menachem Begin, the opposition leader, the head of the Cheirut, to stay in Tel Aviv all Shabbat. Why? He said, we don't know, but if we have to make a decision, we need your consent, we need your support. He came out after they decided on the decision at 5:30. He came to Begin and asked him to join him. And he explained to him why we've decided to do, what the factors are. He said, this could be the end of my political career, why we're doing what we're doing, the negotiations are going nowhere, and the deadline is tomorrow morning. We need an element of surprise. And Begin says to him for the second time in 5 days, he says to him the following: Mr. Prime Minister, this is not a time for partisan politics. Whether this is the greatest success or whether this is the greatest debacle, the world will know that we supported you 100%. We'll tell you that tomorrow, and we'll tell you that in 10 years. This is a time of national tragedy and national crisis. This is not a time for partisan politics. Yitzhak Rabin, who's a military man, a stoic man, I don't know if he hugged his own wife. They say that he welled up in tears and he actually embraced Begin. What happened? They're starting to come towards Uganda, which requires, as they flew through Kenya, which was friendly territory, they have to fly over Lake Victoria, and then after Lake Victoria, land into Kampala, into the Entebbe airport. There was a terrible thunder and lightning storm. And think about anyone who lives near a lake like that, the kind of storms you get. They didn't know if they were going to be destroyed by lightning. They didn't know if they were going to have to abandon the mission. He says, what are we going to do? Basically they tried to wither the storm. The equipment is shaking even though it's being hoisted down. The guys are being thrown all over. What happened when they came off of the lake? It was quiet. It was a localized storm associated with the lake. So once they were a couple miles from Lake Victoria, things had quieted down. They come, they land. The lights were on because they came in on the tail of the British Airways flight. The lights were on. He stops the plane in the runway. The soldiers get out and they put these battery-operated lights on both sides. Because if the lights get shut off, and eventually they will when the gunfire starts, what happens? They got to make sure that for the next flights they don't have to rely on radar landing in the dark. At least there's these battery-operated lights on the runways. He starts up the plane again, pulls it up. They let the bow down. Before the bow is even landed, the cars in the Range Rover start, and they're off. They're off. They've got a kilometer run to get to the old terminal of Entebbe. Things are going smooth. Things are going smooth. And then 2 Ugandan soldiers start getting in the way, holding their guns. Now, remember, the plan was not to do anything. Yoni puts a silencer on his pistol. He shoots one of them. The other gets out of the way. He dives out of the way as the car's running by. He gets up and he starts shooting at them with the machine gun. One of the Israelis in the Range Rover kills that soldier. So the sound now of the machine gun from the Ugandan and the machine gun from the Israeli, possibly, most likely, has just destroyed the element of surprise. Yoni says, you got to floor this thing. Now, the noise is out. We got to get there as quick as possible. And they fly. The plan is this. There are 2 entrances on either side of the terminal. There are 2 main entrances. There are always 2 terrorists on one entrance, 2 terrorists on the other entrance. And since it's at midnight, they assume the other 3 will be sleeping in the VIP lounge. That's basically been the situation. So there's a group, and they had to take, one of the changes they made from Friday night's practice run is they took people out of the car, they took people out of the Range Rovers because they had to have the mobility to be able to move their guns. So they've got less guys doing this. And that means they're going to have to, number 1, get to the 2 entrances, divide up into 2, get the terrorists, the 2 terrorists who are guarding each entrance, get into the building before the terrorists can come out of the VIP lounge on the first floor and throw grenades or kill anybody. Get to those 3 terrorists at stage 2. After they get the 3 terrorists in the VIP lounge, they have to get to the stairwells and get up to the 2nd floor before the Ugandan soldiers can come down and shoot anyone. They get to the 2 terrorists, Brigitte Kuhlman and Wilfred Bruce. They get to the other 2 terrorists. Stage 1 works. The gunfight that's happened has woken up the other terrorists. One of the three Palestinians who was sleeping in the VIP lounge, his name was, they called him Carlos. He was a Palestinian living in Peru. He had adopted the Spanish name Carlos. He came out, he shot out a grenade. Now, George and Renee Carfunkel, who we mentioned, the Americans who had gone on vacation there, they became close with two couples, a Dr. and Mrs. Pasco Cohn, and another couple who, when Brigitte Kuhlman said, everyone give up your passports, he was a former Israeli Air Force colonel. His identity card he ripped up and he literally swallowed. So he had a passport, but his status is an Israeli Air Force colonel. He knew that they would kill him if they'd see that. So he literally ripped it up and swallowed it. They became close with them. And throughout the week they said this: if there's ever a mission, if the IDF comes, whatever you do, crawl, get to the bathroom. You gotta get to the bathroom. Why? He said, this place is flammable. It's a tinderbox. Look at this. There's carpet all over the place. There's blankets. There's mattresses. This place will explode. They do that. They run. What happened? When Carlos set off that grenade, there were a number of hostages in that part of the room. One of them was a very fine young man. His name was Jean-Jacques Mimouni. Jean-Jacques Mimouni was a Moroccan family. They had French and Israeli citizenship. And he was a guy, an upbeat guy, always excited, despite the depression and the malaise that was setting in over the days of the terrorist siege that the hostages were suffering. He would feed them, he wouldn't eat first, he would always feed others, one of the volunteers to feed the other passengers. He would always joke with them and get them, and tell them you got to have hope. Well, he's on fire, and there are a couple of girls next to him, these young women, they're on fire. Now the Israelis came in after they killed the 4 terrorists, and with the bullhorns they're saying what? Stay down. This is the IDF. Everyone stay down. Do not move. What choice did he have? He's burning up. He's got dark pigmentation. He's a Moroccan. He's running at them. He takes 7 bullets to the chest. He's killed by friendly fire. And when they did a post-mortem, when they analyzed every step of what happened, they said, had we done this again, we would have done the same thing. We told everyone to get down. He's running at us. They didn't realize he's running because he was on fire. He's running at us. They shot him. Ida Borochovich was a Russian family who had, the last years of the Brezhnev regime of the USSR, Leonid Brezhnev had allowed certain prisoners of silence. Remember, Elie Wiesel referred to the Russian Jews, the Soviet Jews, as the prisoners of silence. Some of them were allowed to come to Israel. The Borochovich family had. She was shot by one of the terrorists. We don't know which one, but she took a bullet from the terrorist. So 2 hostages were killed. Yoni is hit by a Ugandan sniper. He's down. The chovesh, the medic, gets to him, and they see that the bullet did not exit his body, which is a bad sign. That means the bullet has ripped up his internal organs. They feel it's a matter of time that he must have taken a terrible, he's not responding. They killed the 3, even though Carlos got out and let off the grenade. They killed the 3 at the VIP lounge. They get to the stairwell, and they get to the Ugandans. They throw grenades into the Ugandan soldiers. Many of the Ugandan soldiers who are not killed just give up. They've now taken control of the old terminal with 3 casualties. Jean-Jacques Mimouni, Ida Borochovich, one killed by friendly fire, one by a terrorist bullet, and Yoni, who's hit by a Ugandan sniper. While this is happening, the other guys in the first plane, their job is to take control of the new terminal. Because even if we're successful with the hostages in the old terminal, we've got to drive them a whole kilometer to the new terminal, and there's Ugandan soldiers controlling the new terminal. So the Sanchanim go. A young man who I had the opportunity to interview for this, Surin Hershko. Surin is a Romanian name, it's not a Hebrew name. Surin Hershko was a family that, like many other Romanian Jews, Ceausescu, the dictator of Romania, he would sell his Jews. And he sold what? He sold these Jews. The Hershkos come, they have this young man. This young man does what? He joins and he becomes one of the elite soldiers. He becomes a tzan. He's going to be discharged in 2 weeks, literally in 2 weeks. And what happened? He came on this mission. As they're stopping the Ugandan soldiers, either killing them or getting them to freeze and taking control of the new terminal so that there will be safe passage and boarding onto the plane, Soren Hershko takes a bullet to the back. He takes a bullet to the back that will turn him into a quadriplegic for the rest of his life. For the last 40 years, this man has not been able to take a spoon or a fork to his mouth. He's not been able to clean himself. He has a very fine Filipino aide, but he's been a quadriplegic. Back at the old terminal, what happened? They're hiding in the bathroom, the Carfunkels. The door opens. They hear boots. One of two things. This is either going to be the last second of their life and they're going to be shot by a terrorist or a Ugandan soldier, or this is a member of the IDF. Their heart is pounding. This is going on forever. And they hear the following words. A young IDF soldier with a kippah on his head, a member of the elite Sayeret Matkal. This young IDF soldier says, Shavua Tov, we're here to take you home. Shavua Tov is the greeting we give after Shabbat, after Havdalah. It's Saturday night. We're here to take you home. Those, Renee said, were the sweetest words she's ever heard in her life. And they all forced to run into, they have a series from the second plane which has landed. The lights were shut off at the airport, but those battery-operated lights enabled the second, the third, the fourth plane to land. The second plane has landed, a whole series of Peugeot pickup trucks. And they tell everyone, get into the trucks, run into the trucks, And they've got IDF soldiers who are sitting there literally on the rails of the trucks that if a sniper will shoot at the hostages, the IDF soldier will take the bullet, giving their lives for these, and by these Peugeot pickup trucks. They drive them the kilometer to the plane. The longest, from the time of touchdown to takeoff, the longest amount of time was getting a count. They get a hold of the pilot, David Pardue, and they say, please make sure that all members of the Air France team are here. And he's speaking in French, and they find all the members of the Air France team. The longest time was how to get a right count. They keep counting it. People are in PTSD. People are traumatized. And they finally get a count. Ilan Hartuv comes up to them. My mother's not here. Where's your mother? She's in the hospital. They say, we can't go to the hospital. We apologize, but we have to leave. We have to take off. And what happens? Remember we said the practice run Friday night was 55 minutes? The goal was to do this in 60 minutes from touchdown to takeoff. 51 minutes. 51 minutes, 3 casualties. They land in Kenya, in Nairobi. The other planes are still on the ground. They have military operations. There's gunfights with the towers. Shaul Mofaz has to take out the MiGs, the promise that they made to the Kenyans. They're going to be on the ground in Uganda for longer. What happens when they get to Kenya? There are people who have suffered bullet wounds. Their good friend Pascal Cohn, he took a bullet to the hip. Now, a bullet to the hip is not fatal, but they can't stop the bleeding on the plane, and they have to take him off. His wife wants to get off. No, you stay. They've got Israeli medical teams there to do the surgery. Pascal Cohn died on the table, not from the wound. He died because he had a coagulation problem. He literally bled to death. The 4th casualty, the 4th korban that we have lost. They refuel. The ministers of the Kenyan government who've been working with the Israelis, they call the president of Kenya. It's 2-something in the morning, and they tell him what's happened. He stops them in the middle of the sentence. He says, I don't want to hear this. He says, you never made this call. I never picked up the phone. And he slams the phone. Before he slammed the phone, he said, get the Israelis out of there within the next hour. I want them off our soil in the next hour. And they had all refueled and were all off. Here's the problem. It's 3:30 in the morning, and already the BBC is broadcasting that an Israeli commando unit has come, has freed the hostages. They're still over enemy territory, trying to fly back over international waters. And who knows if they're going to be shot down. Now you're going to have who knows going to come after them. They're scared to death. But they can't even communicate. And they're flying back. At 5 in the morning, they're now over international. When they hit over international waters, Shuki Shami at this point, it's the first time he calls, everyone was given earplugs because it's a huge, huge noise. You know, it's a big, big plane in the cargo hull. Renee said they were standing over the body of this dead soldier. They didn't know who it was. They had him, obviously he was wrapped. All they knew was that he must have been very important, because here was this euphoric miracle mission with such success, and all the soldiers were crying, just standing there, these brave young men with tears in their eyes, looking at the wrapped body of this man who they didn't know if was he their mentor, was he a father figure, was he their friend? But when they hit international waters, Shuki Shami said, now you can speak. And the Israeli soldiers at that point broke out, when they were allowed to speak, in the song Am Yisrael Chai. Yitzhak Rabin at 5 a.m. gets on the phone. He says, President Ford, I'm sure you've heard rumors. I know it's being broadcast. I should be the first one to tell you, and I apologize. We don't even know if they'll make it home safe. We think they'll make it home safe. They're over international waters. They're flying over the Red Sea now. We don't know how many casualties. We know that there have been relatively few. But I want to tell you what happened. And it's 10 p.m. in Washington. President Ford responds to the Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, I want to thank you. You have given the United States of America the greatest birthday present we could have ever asked for. What does that mean? You have given the United States of America the greatest birthday present we could have ever asked for. Because until that point, as of Wednesday, the world had now buckled. The world had capitulated to terror. No longer would the airways be safe to fly. Terror would control the world. And by Israel stopping this, and by Israel taking action, there were quarters in the world that could stand up, and terror could not stop. What happened? The plane lands at Tel Nof. 3 men are there as the hull comes down from the C-130. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Defense Minister Shimon Peres, and Chief of the IDF, Mota Gur. Some of the people barely had clothing on. Some of them were wrapped in sheets because they had been sleeping, you know. Renee didn't have shoes. A young IDF soldier, a young woman, comes and gives her sandals to her. And they make the following speech, a short speech. And they ask for one thing at the end of the speech. Please, we beg of you, for sure not to the press, not even to your families. Don't tell them what kind of soldiers, how many soldiers, what kind of equipment, what kind of planes, what kind of this, what kind of that. Please don't share this. If God forbid, we ever have a hostage situation again, we don't want the terrorists, we don't want the murderers knowing what methods we use and how we employ them. Well, you tell a bunch of Jews to keep a secret. Within 9 months of that, you had 3 major movies. Every Jew remembers where they were in 1976, on July 4th, when they first heard that the hostages were saved. Every Jew knows where they were. When the Maccabees, 2,200 years from the time of the Hanukkah story, once again, we had our own Hanukkah story. The next morning, George and Renee land in JFK, and a ton of American Jews are there to greet them. Both sets of parents with the baby they had left. And his father, George's father, who was an educator, had suffered under the Nazis, had suffered under the communists, had gotten out in 1956. He quoted the famous verse from Psalm 53. When King David says, at that time he wasn't yet King David, Podeh b'shalom nashi mikrav ki rabim hayu imadi. My life has been redeemed. I've been saved in peace. Why? Not because of my own merit, not because of anything great that I've done. Ki rabim hayu imadi. Because the masses were there for me. The whole Jewish world was one family this week, crying and praying and beseeching on your behalf. That's why I'm here, able to touch and kiss and hug my flesh and blood, my own son again. And that morning, Monday morning, there was a special session of cabinet. The Knesset, the Israeli Knesset met. And Prime Minister Rabin, not a man of many words, a military man, stoic, got up and made a small speech to a standing ovation. And afterwards, he invited the opposition leader, Menachem Begin, to speak. And Menachem Begin framed the story of the modern-day Maccabees in something which is probably one of the most famous Jewish speeches of the 20th century. Not since the Six-Day War has our nation known such a profound sense of unity, of achdut. We shared a common anxiety and a sense of fraternal love for our people, emanating from the resolve to rescue our brothers and sisters in peril. Ulai, perhaps, it was because of this unity, this achdut, that we found within ourselves the capacity to mount such a momentous operation. A rescue mission, unprecedented in gallantry and daring. And then he announced to the world, the first time ever, the name Yonatan Netanyahu. His father, Yoni's father, was a good friend of Menachem Begin. Philosophically, they saw the world together. They were both Talmidim, students of Jabotinsky. So this death hit him personally. And he talked about the gallantry of the soldiers and what they did in the daring, risking their lives multiple times on this mission to save people halfway across the world that they had never met. And he made the equation between the Maccabees, the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees of Hanukkah. Not for 2,200 years had God given us the blessing that we could defend ourselves. For 2,200 years, we were under the control of the Romans, the Germans, the Ukrainians, the Poles, whoever it was. We were always at the whim. We were always at the mercy of someone else. And in this generation, the miracle that we live in, we were allowed to protect ourselves, to look after ourselves by God. And he spoke about that. And he referred to them as Hashmonaim, the Maccabees risen anew. And then he turned to the Prime Minister. You and I, Mr. Prime Minister, we belong to different political factions. Our hashkafat olam, our outlook on the world, they differ one from another. But not today. On this day, Mr. Prime Minister, I salute you. I salute you. And I salute the Defense Minister, Mr. Perez, and General Motagor, and every member of the Labor Security Cabinet who was involved in the most difficult decision that a nation's leaders can possibly make. But you, Mr. Prime Minister, you are the leader of a team. And I know something about what it means to be the leader of a team. And that while every one of your colleagues has a share in the decision-making responsibility of the nation, upon your shoulders rests an extra morsel. And who can ever weigh the amount? Who can ever measure the weight of that extra morsel? 30 years ago, it was the Germans who made the selektia at the docks of Auschwitz when the trains came in, with Dr. Mengele and the other German doctors, when a finger to the right had condemned Jewish men, women, and children to death. Then there had been no one to save them. Now we declare for all to hear, never again. Our generation has taken a solemn oath consecrated in the blood of our slain mothers, in the blood of our butchered fathers, in the blood of our asphyxiated babies. Never again, never again, with God Almighty's help, will the blood of the Jew be shed with impunity. Never again, with God's help, would Jewish honor be easy prey. Let the world know that if anyone, anywhere, is persecuted, or is humiliated, or is threatened, or is abducted, or is in any way endangered simply because he or she is a Jew, then Israel, then the tiny state of Israel, will marshal all of its strength with God's help to come to their aid, to bring them to the safe haven of our homeland. This, he said, is the message of Entebbe. Dora Bloch, the British Consul General, came to visit her, but when Idi Amin found out that one of the hostages was still in Uganda, he sent his goons into the hospital. A 73-year-old woman, they pulled her by her hair out of her hospital bed, ripped her down the stairs, they put her in a car, and they put bullets in her skull. They killed the 73-year-old woman as vengeance. It was a known secret where her body was dumped, where her body was buried. It was an area where other political challenges to Idi Amin who had been killed were dumped. In 1979, when finally the Ugandans overthrew this monster of a man, and the Saudi Arabians treated him as a hero. The rest of his life he lived as a king in Saudi Arabia. But in 1979, Israel was able to send forensic experts. They had dental records of Dora Bloch, and they went to the known secret of where she was buried. They dug up her remains. She was brought back to Israel and given Jewish burial. She never made it to her son's wedding. She was the fifth casualty. But the aftermath of this story is that terror will be responded to. That Jewish blood is not cheap. That Jewish lives are not for naught. And that we were given a blessing by God Almighty. We were given a blessing of the state of Israel and the opportunity to defend ourselves. And that our boys, although we would much rather they went to university, that they would become educated. But our boys like Surin Hushko, who when asked, what do you have to say? Man never got married, never had children. He said to me in the interview, listen, do I wish that the last 40 years of my life I'd not lived as a quadriplegic? Of course. But if I could do it again, he said, for the Jewish people to be free in our own land, and for me to play a role protecting and looking after my fellow Jew, that's a duty, that's an honor, and that's a privilege that I, as a young Jewish man, had the opportunity to do. This is the modern day Maccabees. And this is the event that took the Jewish people out of depression, out of malaise, and that changed the attitude of the Jewish people and the Jewish world. And this was a statement that stood up to terror for 25 years, for a quarter of a century, until 9/11. It changed the way the world dealt with terror. I want to wish everyone on behalf of Entebbe a meaningful, a wonderful, a powerful Hanukkah. And that we were blessed to relive the Hanukkah story in our own way, in our generation, in our lifetime. On behalf of the great people at Entebbe, we want to thank the Diker family for having provided, funded, and presented this program. Happy Hanukkah.